Welcome back to another episode of On Background with Susan Crabtree and myself. I'm Eric Eggers. Susan, yesterday was election day, and I have to admit I'm a little let down, not by the results, which we'll get to shortly, and I think are very interesting and relevant, both in terms of the localities in which they exist, but also for the larger national trends that they might suggest. I'm disappointed, Susan, because California conducted an election and they apparently know the results on the same day. What is happening in your home state?
Unfortunately, what's happening is it was a shellacking. So when the Prop 50 team wins this big, it was 63.8% to 36.2% on the no side, you're going to know right away. And there's 75% of the vote in. Normally, that's not the case when you have different congressional districts all across the state. But this was a statewide election, and it was nowhere near close. Which for the Republicans is they're around licking their wounds. People are calling within the conservative movement in California, calling for the resignation of the California GOP chair, Corin Rankin. And she's pushing back on that, saying they had a presser this morning, and they are filing a federal lawsuit against these new maps already on the second day that they were approved. And we'll see how it plays out. It could make its way all the way to the Supreme Court, where there's another voting rights case. This one's not going to be voting rights, but there'll be that's voting rights case in Louisiana that everyone's looking at. And this one is going to be focusing on the fact that the maps are not supposed to be redistricted, rewritten, unless there's a significant change in a demographic or population. And they're saying that that wasn't the case. But the person who drew the maps, who's a Democratic operative, definitely drew them to benefit Latinos.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that the argument that the Dillon Law Group is making, which of course is related to Harmeet Dillon, the Associate Attorney General with the Civil Rights Division, are suggesting that they didn't actually receive a study to indicate whether or not there would be some negative racial harm. So, and I want to ask you about that and what you think the likelihood is, or what at least the people you're talking to and listening to on the ground are saying about the likelihood of this, because it does matter, right? The electoral map is going to matter. 2028 matters. You said Republicans are licking their wounds. That would be the opposite of what Gavin Newsom was doing last night. I believe the technical term is peacocking, and we can hear Gavin Newsom at his press conference last night strutting his stuff and sounding, what's the word, Susan? Let's listen to Gavin Newsom last night.
Let me underscore, it's been a good evening. For everybody, not just the Democratic Party, but what a night for the Democratic Party. A party that is in its ascendancy, a party that's on its toes, no longer on its heels, from coast to coast, sea to shining sea. But it was not just a victory tonight for the Democratic Party, it was a victory for the United States of America, for the people of this country and the principles that our founding fathers lived and died for. And so we're proud. We're proud here in California to be part of this narrative this evening. We're proud of the work that the people of the state of California did tonight to send a powerful message to an historic president. Donald Trump is an historic president. He is the most historically unpopular president in modern history.
He's sounding not Presbyterian, Susan. What's your reaction to how Gavin Newsom reacted to this big shellacking? It's worth noting, by the way, all credit to him and the effort. Prop 50 passed last night in California, this redistricting effort, which, as you reported, was kind of illegal. It passed by a greater margin than California's own Kamala Harris beat Donald Trump a year ago. So some significant political feat for Gavin Newsom last night.
Well, yes, I don't think it is that big of a political feat, but because it was an anti-Trump vote. And if you take a poll in California, you will get the same basic percentage of supporters and anti-supporters for Donald Trump. And with these ICE raids in California, it has ginned up the opposition against Donald Trump, and you saw those No Kings rallies. And this is no surprise to me. I was just focused on how much they were going to win by. And I talked to Adam Kincaid, who runs the Republican redistricting nationwide, and he said, there's so many hurdles that California is going to have to go through. This is illegal for them, and they're going to have to put it together so quickly. I said, don't underestimate Gavin Newsom. He has nothing to run on in his state, and he is not well liked by other governors. When Trump was first elected, every governor was saying, I'm the resistance governor. No, I'm the resistance governor. And so J.B. Pritzker and Jared Polis were teamed up together against Gavin Newsom vying. Now Gavin Newsom has a wave to ride right into the presidential election of 2028, and he hopes right into the Oval Office. Before that, he had an abysmal record in California that we outline extensively in our book. Highest cost of living, highest gas, high spikes in crime. The list goes on and on, homelessness, and where did the money go? So this is a moment of victory for him. He said the Democratic Party is in ascendancy from coast to coast. No, just on the coasts. And that's what they are to begin with. In fact, leading up to this, as you very well know, Eric Eggers, the polls show quite the opposite, that the Democratic Party was trying to find its way, was just on the wane. People were bolting from the Democratic Party in just as much as they've been bolting from California since Gavin Newsom took control of that state and ran it into the ground. So yes, this is very personal for Californians because the Republicans have almost 6 million registered voters and registered Republicans in the state, more than many states combined elsewhere in the country. And they're disenfranchising those voters with these maps. And we'll see how this plays out in the courts because, as you know, they had an independent commission that the voters in California voted on twice, approved, and they are basically taking that away and putting it back in the hands of politicians like Gavin Newsom and trusting the politicians now. And, I don't know if you think Gavin Newsom needs more power, but I would just tell anybody who thinks that to go to Skid Row in Los Angeles and take a look at his record.
Well, I will say this. First off, I want to note that, it's our 4th episode. And the honeymoon's clearly over because we're now having our first, I think, fight on the podcast, right? And there's got to be, and that's okay. It's okay. It's okay. We'll just talk it out and let's just approach each other with charity and humility. But why I'm going to push back on the idea that I think it is an act of some political consequence is because of exactly what you just said. And if you look at the larger trends, and we'll get into some details there and some of the other factors, but I think it's a great point, first off, that it wasn't necessarily coast to coast, just on the coast, but Democrats with resounding victories on other coastal states in New Jersey and Virginia, and then also in New York City. But why I think it's an act of political kind of magic or wizardry, if you like, is that one of the big issues that voters seem to be pushing back on the status quo is it's about costs. And the economy has not gotten better under Donald Trump, and that's one of the reasons why you see people voting for the other things. Certainly in New York City, as we'll get to, people aren't so much, they're selecting socialism and Zoran Mamdani because they're trying to pick something they think is going to be cheaper. Gavin Newsom now gets to join in the parade of the politically victorious who are like, yeah, everything else is too expensive. And Gavin Newsom's like, yeah, right? Even though it's Gavin Newsom's fault that things are so expensive. But in California, it's not about the quality of life. It's not about the cost of living, which is egregious and astronomical and popular. Now it's about, no, here's how we fight and beat Donald Trump. And he kind of just gets to overlook everything else. And I think that is, it's kind of interesting and impressive in a weird way.
Yes. And I think we'll see how it plays out in terms of overall the redistricting, national redistricting, whether Republicans are going to come out ahead. Because when I talked to Adam Kincaid, who is in charge of that, of redistricting for Republicans, he's
nationally, by the way, not just in California, nationally, right? This is something that they're happening in Texas, they're happening in California. This is a national effort.
Right. And, it's at Michigan. And certainly there's this voting rights case focused on Louisiana, which could net 18, 19 seats for Republicans.
Correct.
So overall, even without the voting rights case, Republicans are telling me that it's going to be a net positive for Trump, because the Democrats had so skewed and gerrymandered the districts for so long across the country that any pushback is going to help Republicans long term in this next election in 2026 for the midterm control of the House of Representatives and the Senate, and down the road for decades. So they're willing to see California as collateral damage. And that, of course, is terrible for Californians. And Kevin Kiley, a very rising star in the Republican California Party, a congressman from the Sacramento area. But we'll see if he can pull it out against Gavin Newsom. He has complained that Gavin Newsom has twice tried to target him, and it was personal. But yes, for the time being, Gavin Newsom gets to be the man of the hour, and he gets to try to turn his failed record, into a campaign slogan that he basically fought back Donald Trump and won. He had a lot of help, as you notice on his Twitter feed today. He has a video of President Obama and Trump in the ring, and President Obama gets a knockout because President Obama was in all of these Yes on Prop 50 ads that we saw an avalanche of, because they had twice as much money as Republicans, at least twice as much.
Not just the ring, it's a WWE, it's professional wrestling. So Gavin Newsom is doubling down. Just kind of quickly, Susan, and then we'll move on to some of these other races. But I think you use the D word, and I think it's a big deal, because disenfranchisement it's ironic that Republicans in California are saying, look, what they've done is they've disenfranchised certain people. Yet at the federal level, they're saying, no, these other people aren't being disenfranchised. It will be very interesting to see how these arguments shake out. But just remind people what the Republican number of seats is going to drop to based on this redistricting effort. And again, because I do think it's stunning that you have 36% of a state's population that's now going to be represented, I think you said, out of 52 seats in Congress by how many districts? How many districts will be Republican majority districts now?
Okay, so there's 9 Republican districts in California out of 51.
Okay.
So there's going to be a shift of 4 to 6.
So from 9 to 3. So out of 51 seats, Republicans will hold 3.
Yes, 3 of 51. And when Donald Trump received about 38% of the vote in California, it doesn't matter. It's taxation without representation. And it's exactly what our country fought a revolutionary war against the British to fight back against. It's oppressive, it's ridiculous, it's absurd, but it's all fair game if you hate Donald Trump and you're pushing back and you're trying to run for president on no record at all.
So Gavin Newsom had a great night last night. Another man who had a great night on the other side of the country has also made it a habit, and it's been a good political bet of picking fights with Donald Trump. In some ways, he could not be less like Gavin Newsom, although he is a privileged child of the upper class and trying to kind of position himself as maybe something other than his upbringing suggests. But Zohran Mamdani is the new mayor, or at least the mayoral-elect of New York City. And, he obviously has been welcoming a fight. He's happy to be antagonistic of Donald Trump. Listen to one of the parts of his victory speech last night.
Thank you to those so often forgotten by the politics of our city who made this movement their own. I speak of Yemeni bodega owners and Mexican abuelas, Senegalese taxi drivers and Uzbek nurses, Trinidadian line cooks and Ethiopian aunties. Yes, aunties. To every New Yorker in Kensington and Midwood and Hunts Point.
So it's an ethnic coalition that Mr. Mamdani has assembled, and I think it speaks to, are we in a position? I don't know how relevant you feel like this was for the California vote, but one of the big trends, like the two big trends that people are speaking to that are in common with New Jersey and Virginia and New York City, is you saw young women voted 80% for the Democrat, whether it's a proposition or the candidate in New York Virginia or New Jersey. You also had female candidates in Virginia and New Jersey, so that probably helped. But 80% of young female votes going for Democrats. And then Hispanic vote dropped significantly. Donald Trump was able to win roughly 40% of the Hispanic vote. They're saying the Hispanic vote has since dropped down to less than 1/3 in these key areas. And so I think Mamdani's reference of immigrant groups seems significant. What's your sort of assessment of what the New York City race specifically, and then if you want to comment on New Jersey or Virginia, what it says about like the collective reaction to this first year of Trump presidency, or do you think that that's not fair to draw a conclusion from that?
I find the Virginia race a lot more interesting than the Mamdani race for drawing conclusions. I feel like you have a government shutdown. This occurred in the government shutdown, so you have a lot of federal workers in Virginia that are nervous about their jobs, and a lot of federal workers who lost their jobs when USAID was shut down. I have friends that happened to. So you have anxiety against Donald Trump, I can think, and against costs and inflation and the government shutdown in Virginia, certainly. I think the Mamdani race is far less significant nationally to draw conclusions from, because a lot of things had to line up for Mamdani to win. And as Speaker Johnson just said on the Real Clear Politics podcast last night, that it was only 12% of the population that elected Mamdani of New York City. So he was elected with over 1 million votes. And you had Andrew Cuomo, who was damaged goods from the COVID and his sexual harassment cases, running against him, and then he dropped out and became an independent. And you had Curtis Silva, the Republican, who would not drop out of the race. So you had this mix flowing into there, and it became that the democratic socialism is taking control over Manhattan and New York City. I'm not sure that's the case. It is going to be ruled by a socialist, a democratic socialist, and that's going to become a huge target for Republicans, an easy target nationwide in the 2026 midterms. So I don't think that's such a negative thing for Republicans nationwide, and I think it's terrible for New York City because we all know, if you talk to the Cubans and the Argentinians who've moved, and Venezuelans, mainly the Venezuelans and Cubans who've moved to Florida, they've lived communism, they've escaped communism and socialism. So, that's why that state went so red for Trump last time, because they're saying, we don't want to move in this direction. So now New York City gets to have its own grand experiment with socialism, and we'll see what shakes out of that. It's going to be an easy, made-for-TV commercials for the Republicans for 2026.
There's already been some speculation now that since Donald Trump obviously has a home and has some property in New York City, and it's going to be run by Mamdani, will Donald Trump send ICE after Mamdani, or will Mamdani send NYPD after Donald Trump? And the recipe for political theater seems particularly rich. But I do think what you said is very interesting, and I think it's significant because yes, all three had a similar result. You had big wins for Democrats in liberal New York City. They want to act like Virginia is purple. It certainly had a Republican governor before. And then I guess in some historic fashion, it's the first time that New Jersey has gone for the same political party in 3 elections in a row. But each of them have, I think, interesting and unique things that do offer some explanation. In Virginia, as you said, the federal shutdown is a great point. I haven't actually heard too many people make that point, and to the extent that they can blame Donald Trump for that, it makes sense why they might select the oppositional party. Also, candidates matter, and the reality is that Winsome Earl-Sears, the current lieutenant governor, was not a Trump supporter, was actually openly critical of Donald Trump earlier this decade, said that they did not support his running for re-election in 2024. There's some suggestion that's dampened her enthusiasm among the base there. She certainly underperformed Donald Trump in some key areas, and I think there was some fair criticism of her overall worth as a candidate generally, and the work that her campaign did. So that may explain some significant underperformance on her end. And then in New Jersey, you have a guy, Chattarelli. It's his 3rd time running, and he did worse this time than 4 years ago. So it's not as if these are overwhelmingly popular candidates on the Republican side.
No, that's right. I think in New Jersey, I think Chattarelli was counting on some of these scandals having to do with the Naval Academy. Mikey Sherrill is a Naval Academy graduate, and she was found that she wasn't able to walk during her graduation because she was somehow involved in a cheating scandal. And she didn't really come clean on that right away. And then she came on clean later or her explanation was that she knew about it and she wouldn't, rat out the people that were really doing the cheating. So I think there was some optimism on behalf on the part of Republicans that they could make that more competitive than it usually is, that governor's race. But it didn't turn out that way at all. You had the 56% that went for Sherrill to Ciattarelli's 43%. So that might have been a pipe dream that just became, it just cratered to reality that Jersey is really more of a Democratic blue state than a competitive swing state, for sure.
Well, and literally every county in Virginia, every single one shifted blue compared to the presidential election of last year. And they'll continue to do deep dives into what's driving that. I will just ask you this, and we can kind of end here because we talked about California, we've talked about New York City, and now we're talking about these other races. But if there is one trend to watch, I mean, certainly Donald Trump has been leaning into the law enforcement background. We talked about the ICE enforcement, what's happening in California, and they're sending ICE people all over the country. Some polling does suggest that in 3/5 of Hispanic voters in New Jersey and 3/4 of Hispanic voters in Virginia think Trump has gone too far with deportations, and 63% of Latino voters, again, according to the exit polling across the country yesterday, say Latino voters disapprove of Trump's job performance, and 2/3 say his immigration policies have gone too far. And that's Latino voters, and it's only relevant because those were largely credited for the gains in expanding the demographic base of the Republican voter last year. And it does seem like that's potentially eroding some. My question to you, Susan, is from the people you're talking to within the administration or in these GOP circles, do you think that there's any inkling that might be the case? Do you think that there's any chance that we'll see a soft pedaling of what has been immigration enforcement policies thus far, or no?
Yeah. Well, if you know anything about Stephen Miller, which I had worked with him when he was back in the Senate as a Senate staffer, and he's not going to back out. So you're going to have to remove Stephen Miller from your administration to move forward. I do know that there is a very intense battle going on between Customs and Border Protection and ICE right now over this very thing, even before these results were in. So that was the essential crux of it. That were they going too far? Were they attacking too many? Were they going after having raids against too many non-criminals? And so that was a debate within the Trump administration. Now you're seeing some fallout over that. So I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. And certainly you want to look at like you just did, very closely at these Latino numbers, and certainly in California, because the maps are skewed specifically for Latino voters. And we say in the book that the what changed California, what made it a supermajority state, is we blame in part Ronald Reagan's amnesty, opening the doors, flinging the doors open, and then of course Gavin Newsom making it a magnet. So that is what the Trump administration is pushing back on. These 10 or some people say 15, even more million illegal immigrants that came in, and that Democrats are motivated because they tend to vote for, not always, not in Florida, but they tend to vote Democratic. So this is a national conversation, I think, that is going to be taking place for weeks and weeks after this. Obviously, as we head into the midterms, it's critical to know, whether this administration is going to make some changes in its own policies or else lose those Hispanic voters in the 2026 midterms, and what kind of impact that has. I think the Republicans have been a little bit too confident about their redistricting plan that I mentioned beforehand, and that they can use California as collateral damage. That's just what's going to happen in California. We're going to write that state off. Let's be careful, though, because if they don't win that voting rights case in the Supreme Court, the Louisiana one that I just mentioned, it's going to get really interesting how many districts advantage Republican advantage versus Democratic advantage with this big Newsom win. It's going to be come November next year.
Yeah, I don't know, Susan. You're suggesting Republicans are going to be potentially overconfident. It's hard for me to believe that a political party that's comprised largely of white males would be overconfident. It just doesn't seem on brand for us. And so, but hey, you are the award-winning journalist, so I'll take your word. I will point out that, just to kind of end where we started, if Republicans continue to have problems with Latino support, the whole reason Gavin Newsom's even doing what they did yesterday, which was a big win for them, was allegedly a reaction to what Texas did, which is redraw maps. But understand that when Texas redrew their maps, they're relying on Latino support for Republicans. 5 of those congressional districts are majority Latino. So it would be ironic and quite poor execution politically if they ended up losing California seats over something that doesn't actually benefit them because they lost Republican support, or they lost Latino support for Republicans in Texas to begin with. It's very ironic, and it's one of the stories that's worth watching. And look at you broke a little news about this infighting within Border Patrol and ICE over this issue specifically. But that's why we bring you, the listener and viewer, on Background with Susan Crabtree. We thank you so much for joining us. Susan, great job today. I know you've got 1,000 stories to file. California's crazy. These federal bureaucracies are waging war within each other. You're going to continue to break news at Real Clear Politics and on your podcast. Thank you so much. And thank you to the audience for taking time. You can find us wherever podcasts are found, and check out our YouTube videos. We put a lot of time and effort into those, and we love to read your comments, and we'll respond to those as well. Thank you so much. Until next time.